this is my guess, and Geoff, tell me if I'm wrong. Next week.
No, you're Will.
Good time zone internet. Hello and welcome to Design Club Live, the only game design show on the internet. Well, you will never pay more than MSRP. I am your East Coast Design Club host, Will, joined as always by my West Coast pal, Geoff. Say hi to the people, Geoff.
Hi to the people, Geoff. Hey, everybody. I am Geoffrey Zatkin. I am the studio director of Extra Credits and resident game designer in residence, joined by Percival, also known as Keyboard Cat.
So if you see Percival making an appearance, it's planned. It's okay.
Who's planning to cover my shirt with orange hair for today.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's me. I'm Geoff. This is Percival. Will, who are you?
Hi, I'm Will. I'm the Twitch Overlord here. If it's happening live on our Twitch channel 5 days a week, I'm probably involved with it in some way. I'm a career critic and the voice of Twitch chat when they decide that they have something worth saying. And today, we're talking about we're talking about a sort of general concept with a specific example. So today, we're talking about Lorcana, and more specifically, we're talking about how hard it was for me to get access to a product I was willing to pay money for. This has happened quite a lot recently, Geoff. It happened quite a bit during the pandemic.
I mean, trying to get a PlayStation 5, you and Matt did an animated thing like 2 years ago where, Matt was talking about how happy he was to get the chance to throw money at Sony to buy a product that they were trying to sell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or early pandemic when webcams, it's like, hey, everybody, you're working from home. And suddenly webcams were just out of stock.
Correct.
Graphics cards, when people started doing all the mining, and even further back. But I mean, scarcity is an interesting thing, and even more so going on right now. But for us, I mean, the reason we're talking about this is yesterday, as Will and I were chatting, Will held up his packs like, hey, Geoff, look what I managed to get.
Right. I had a sense of accomplishment that I was able to to purchase a product at its MSRP. So let's unpack that real quick, because that's a piece of jargon. MSRP stands for Manufacturer's Suggested Retail Price.
Or the price printed on the box. That is
correct.
Generally. And that, by the way, is also, if you ever see like the stores that put the little labels with prices on, that often means that they are putting a price over the MSRP if they want to charge something different. Although,
it is worth noting that at least on Lorcana boxes, there is no printed MSRP, and that's becoming more common on packaging that's sold multinationally.
Oh, that's right, because prices are regional.
Correct. Well, and even if you're doing one print run for all of North America, the Canadian price will absolutely differ from the American price. And if you're doing one English run, then the UK price, the Canadian price, the Australian price, and the American price will all be different as well. But the MSRP is depends on the product, known or unknown. But Geoff, we want to. I want to
say, what was it for Lorcana?
Lorcana.
What's a starter?
So it's somewhere between 18 and 20.
Okay.
Depending on taxes and local jurisdiction and this is weird, what each distributor sells it at. That's like a whole additional wrinkle in physical goods, is that each distributor sells it to each store potentially a different price. So you may be paying a different middleman fee, but generally $20, because online they're going for between 40 and 50. And I found a place locally that was like, yeah, we think that's stupid. We're going to sell it at $20.
Which means that they've probably sold out now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They were sold out by the time I got to the store to pick up the one that I asked a guy to hold for me.
Oh, wait, so you know a guy?
I do, in fact, know a guy. I have proficiency in I know a guy. It's useful as a Twitch streamer. So
absolutely.
So that
kicked off this whole thing.
Right. So let's also be really clear. We're not talking about the difference between... we're not talking about the ability to find super rare individual cards, right? These starter decks have one booster pack in them and a selection of 60 predetermined cards. I'm not talking about my ability to find a rare card in that booster pack or indeed any specific single. I'm talking about my ability to purchase the product itself.
So
right? Not
actually, that brings up an interesting concept. There are a couple types of scarcity. There's basically, if you were going to just bunch them together, and we could unpack these for a bit actually, let's unpack them for a bit. There's basically planned and unplanned scarcity. And we're planning to talk about kind of the unplanned scarcity versus the planned scarcity.
Correct.
Or because there are, like, one of the biggest terms people might have heard of is artificial scarcity. And that's basically supplying less than you know there'll be a demand for to kind of drive up the price or keep the price high.
Correct.
And this is a marketing tactic. It's producing something in a limited quantity. So luxury watches or certain apparel drops. Diamonds are a great example of this, where they supply less. They keep the price artificially high by restricting the flow of diamonds that get released from the big diamond cartels. But even some like toys, like Beanie Babies, for a while, I mean, there are other things where we've seen artificial scarcity brought in, but that isn't. But that is an intentional thing.
Correct. And that's different than what we're calling designed scarcity, or using scarcity as a part of a game or other experiences design. So for instance, chase rares are a great example of this. So chase rare is a card that is notorious, that is very small in quantity, right? That it has a much lower chance than other cards to be unboxed in a loot box, right? The ultimate example of this would be Wizards of the Coast recently, in collaboration with Lord of the Rings, did a set in which they printed the One Ring. And I promptly put my foot in my mouth and I said the One Ring wouldn't be a big deal. And oh boy, is it a big deal. It's on track to get banned in at least one format, if not multiple. And then, there are many copies of...
There's only one, right? Like, only one guy owns it, so why would they even have to ban it? Like, he's not going to show up and play it.
There's two versions of this, right? Okay. And that's what makes one of them a chase rare. So, there's the One Ring, right? Which is a card which has statistics, and there are many copies of the One Ring. In fact, many decks play 4 copies of them, right? You can only have one out at a time, but, Okay. Just go with it. There is, in addition, a singular copy called the One of One Ring. And it is currently owned by Post Malone, who paid $2 million for it. I'm not making all of the words that I just said are true and factual and hilarious, and I love all of them. Post Malone, it turns out, is a big fan of Magic, and paid $2 million for the only copy in existence of the One of One Ring.
And I know there were bounties out. I don't think I'd realized that he had the highest bounty, or was the one that whoever found it chose to.
Yeah, he didn't actually have the highest bounty, but the person who found it was a big fan of Post Malone, and Post sweetened the deal by offering to fly him out for a concert. And the guy was like, well, yeah, obviously, I'm going to take the person that I like, who I want to meet anyway, and I get to hand him the card in person. Yeah, I'm going to do that, right? And like that's just cool. But that's a great example, right? There are cards that you can play with, and then there are cards that people spent a lot of money chasing after, right?
Did they actually get named that by like the internet, or was that an initial term for like whoever did the first one?
I don't know. It's been around for as long as I've been really back into card games, which is probably 5 or 6 years.
Because I played much earlier and haven't been doing CCGs in a while.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that is designed scarcity. Another version would be something I'm familiar with just from my MMO background is MMO rare drops, which is basically where design scarcity could be the number that exists, like the One Ring or certain low printings of cards. Another would be the rate at which things say enter a game. So if you're playing my old game EverQuest all the way up to Final Fantasy now, there are certain items that just drop at very low percentages or on timed intervals at not very often, limiting their supply that comes into the ecosystem.
Correct.
And so that is another form of designed scarcity. And that is used by many, many types of games, digital and physical.
Yep. You can also do, in a digital space, you can do controlled payouts, right? With things like loot boxes.
It's basically a slot machine.
It's basic when we're considering loot box in that way. It's absolutely just a slot machine, right? An example of this would be Hearthstone, right? Hearthstone has a scaling chance that you will get a legendary out of each set that you open boosters for. And
that's slightly different than a regular slot machine, but yeah, that's
right. Well, many digital slot machines are required by law to pay out after a certain threshold of plays now. Yeah, slot machine law is weird. Don't.
Not my field of expertise.
Yeah, don't go into casinos. And then the last kind of designed scarcity is timed. Limited edition digital goods. You can only get this digital thing if you pre-order. You can only get this, They're
usually incentives.
Right. You can only get this mount if you participate in this seasonal event. Or in a physical space, you can only get the limited local game store cover of this Dungeons and Dragons book if you do it, right? And those, by the way, if you're sitting on some of the ones from when 5th edition first started doing it, they're extraordinarily expensive. Fun facts.
Oh, or as Richard from chat just said, FOMO scarcity.
Yes. Yeah.
That's I think that is a perfect way of summing it up. Hey, if you don't get it now, you may later.
Yeah, and you want it later, you're going to have to pay a lot more, like 6 times as much. There are some of the limited edition covers that were selling for $50 when they released, and the contents of the book are in no way unique. The cover is causing it to go for $300 US as opposed to $50 US.
Yeah.
Because people really want that shiny cover, and they have to have the complete set of all the variants, and it's the rarest of the variants.
And there's a lot of variants of all of these, and there's probably more types of scarce. Those were just some of the ones we were like thinking of, but this is the rest of the episode today is specifically not going to be covering when people intentionally plan to have something being scarce. What we were more interested in was, hey, Will couldn't buy a card pack. What made that happen?
Right. Why? Right. So we want to talk about all of the things that have caused unplanned, unintended, undesigned, unexpected scarcity.
Or with my designer brain, I'm not going to say all, I'm going to say a good number of, because there's always an extra thing to add to the list.
Right.
But it just, as it popped up with the cards, we realized this has been happening a lot more recently due to some interesting events, and thought it was worth talking about, because it is kind of it is a thing that we were not as used to pre-pandemic that has become more common now, just due to a variety of factors in the world, a lot of which actually interact with gaming in some way.
So let's start at the very beginning.
It's a very good place to start.
Right? Okay. I am going to make a physical game, right? Because this kind of scarcity only applies to physical products. Any kind of digital product automatically skates past unplanned scarcity, right? Unless there's something...
Unless you're...
really weird.
As of this filming, unless you're possibly building on the Unity engine.
We're going to talk about that next week. It's going to be great.
Maybe. We'll see.
We're ordering our episode. Someone's going to know that we shot this before Unity, even though Unity's going to come out before this one. So
who knows?
This is an Easter egg. Comment below if you found it. A physical product. So I'm going to make the Hecknomancer board game, right? I have completed all of my design stuff for the Hecknomancer board game. And I would like to figure out how many Hecknomancer board games I need to pay to have produced at what price point. Jeff, what's that process look like?
There's a whole bunch. And, that's that all the way up to, one of these. Or this comes with an extra kicker as well, which we'll get to. But this is basically something called demand planning, which is... Say you're going to go make the Hecknomancer board game, which we know will sell a whole bunch. Well, we think we'll sell a whole bunch. Are people interested? We think people are interested. Okay, we've made this game. We need to go do a print run. This is going to take, from the time we submit it to the time we get the games back, 3 months. We're going to have to pay up front for every single one of these that we print. And then we're going to have to pay to get them shipped over to our distribution center to then either go to physical stores or to get sent to people who ordered it online from us.
Correct.
How many should we print?
Well,
because we're going to be selling these. It's a premium board game. We're going to be selling these for $59.99 or $60, and it's going to take us $23 of printed material to make these board games.
Okay. First off, Jeff, you haven't bought a premium board game in years, and it shows.
Sorry, this is going to be $199. The Dark Tower
go.
Limited. I have a couple sitting right over there. I was just picking something that happened to correspond with this price.
Yeah, right. So I have the perfect answer, which is you should print however many have backed the Kickstarter.
Right.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that hack in a minute.
Right. That's a great hack. That is absolutely the hack that the board game world has more or less decided on. But the big answer is, in the absence of Kickstarter, is the maximum number I am reasonably confident I can sell. And that number is a weird number to arrive at.
And so back when I used to own, I was a game designer for a very long time, but then I also founded and ran a video game research firm. And one of the things we were very good at was forecasting. Because let's go over to, say that who put out Elden Ring? Bandai Namco.
Yeah.
And you need to know how many physical copies of Elden Ring to print. Because that also, like, you send your gold master in, they go print a certain number of them, but you have to buy a time slot for that. So many things are getting printed in games, and there's only a certain number of groups that make physical game boxes that you usually slot in. And one of the reasons that games getting delayed is a big deal is if you miss your printing time slot, there might not be another one for a month or 2 or 3.
Yes.
Like, you physically might not be able to get your product in. And the other one is because this is a PlayStation 5 game, Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo as well charge per copy that gets made, not per copy that gets sold, which is an interesting thing on their part, unless it changed recently, but I don't know why they'd change it. They have a stranglehold on the console market.
Yeah.
So if you're Bandai Namco and you're like, cool, we think this is going to be a great game, let's go print 1 million copies of these. So you're going to go out, you're going to pay the cost, you're going to get 1 million printed up, it's going to get shipped out to all of the digital stores and GameStops and everything else, and we're assuming physical only for the moment. We'll get digital in. So if the game is a flop, and say they only sell 300,000, which isn't a flop for some things, but for a game like that would be, there's now 700,000 copies sitting that they've paid Sony for, shipped out to stores that those stores really don't want to have sitting on their shelves, and are basically going to ask for a refund and or slash prices from the $60 down to the $40 to the $20 to the, as low as it goes. And eventually, as Richard Spears said again, it flops and it lands in the ET landfill.
I was going to say, and then at the end of all of that, you have to pay the ultimate price, which is paying to ship them to a hole in the desert.
Yeah. So nobody wants to order too many.
Right.
But the other scenario is, say it's a hit and your millions sell out immediately, and there's an audience that would have bought another 1 or 2 million copies of this. You might not be able to get those to the store for 1 or 2 or 3 months because of this physical printing thing, and then getting it made and shipping it out. And who knows, 2 months from now, maybe half of those people have moved on to their next game and are no longer interested in it.
Right.
So you have the risk of the second printing of, wait, who's going to buy this? So demand planning, figuring out how many copies you think you're going to sell, is a big thing. Again, with board games and everything else as well. And that's one of the reasons that digital copies of games are so much less risky for publishers, is that, if they sell out of Elden Ring physical now, you can at least go buy the digital copy on your PlayStation or your Xbox or, wherever you want to go play it.
Yep. So
that has de-risked the game industry in some ways. But board games, on the other hand, or Blu-ray, movies or copies of any sort of physical thing you print up, it is a huge thing. And one of the reasons that sometimes there is scarcity is that whoever was planning on, doing the demand planning side underestimated how many people actually wanted to get it.
Right. And segueing perfectly into that, Geoff, sometimes the number of people who want to get any particular thing, changes unexpectedly, because like Geoff said, there's that lead time, right? there's that lead time. So your forecast, if nothing changes, might have been perfectly accurate, right? Your forecast for how many copies of Elden Ring were going to sell might have been perfectly accurate, or the PlayStation 5, or Lorcana, or graphics cards, or whatever, might have been perfectly accurate, and then the world changes, which is exactly... Something happens, which is exactly what happened with webcams and microphones and stream decks and green screens. Green screens were all over the place, right, for a while, especially the ones that aren't just... Geoff has a nice fancy one. Mine is literally just a big old piece of green fabric attached to the ceiling because it's a pandemic.
Actually, shout out to Elgato's pop-up green screens. If you have never seen one and you want a green screen, just Google it. It's one of those conference flyer or things where you bring out a little stand, you put it down, you pull it up, hook it on the thing.
Yeah.
When you're done, it slides back down. You slide it onto your futon.
Yep.
It's they're reasonably priced, they're robust, they're portable, and they get put away.
Hashtag not sponsored yet, but Elgato, hit us up. We'll talk.
Yeah.
So that's a whole thing, is that demand, right? So what Geoff was talking about was a supply side,
right?
A supply side decision, right? We are going to supply X number of copies in anticipation of demand. If demand changes because everyone's working from home and needs it, or because...
as a reminder to people, there was a time, sometime in February, March of 2020, I think...
April,
right around there, where in a 1 to 2 week period, I'd say more than half of the Western, I can't comment on the East, but half of the Western workforce suddenly went from working in an office to working at home.
Yes. And that
in a very short amount of time.
Yep.
And a lot of them, and schools went from being in person to being at home and said, we are going to be teaching virtually.
Yep.
And suddenly everybody who didn't have a webcam or suddenly realized they were going to be on a webcam for a lot longer than they'd planned to, suddenly went out to buy one. Yep. And they bought microphones and they bought green screens and they bought ring lights and every other thing to make working from home, actually, and computer, there is a whole slate of things that just were not planned before that because this was a once-in-a-century pandemic.
Yep.
And
so,
they all sold out.
Correct. And there was no way the supply chain could have forecasted that, right? Logitech, Elgato, no one could have been like, yes, we should have X. It's unreasonable to expect them to be like, yes, we should have extra on hand just in case the once-a-century thing happens again.
You know, actually, who really won out of that? Everybody who had crappy backlog products inventory they were trying to get rid of.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, people were like, well, a crappy thing is better than a not a thing. Yeah. There were a lot of companies that had backlogs of things that they didn't know what to do with because they're discontinued products that they were able to just go clear out.
Yeah.
So,
also,
minor win for tiny edge case, but...
Yeah, the American consumer also won because it also forced a bunch of infrastructure upgrades in the American domestic internet, but that's another supply and demand problem that we'll have to deal with another day. So then there's...
So yeah, demand planning, unexpected rush.
Yep.
And somebody who said it in chat, somebody then called out, supply chains.
Right.
What about that?
I think it was DemonWorks. What if global shipping hiccups in a just-in-time delivery world?
Yeah.
Right. Correct. What if someone can't steer a really big boat
through the Panama Canal?
Through the Panama Canal. Whoops. Oopsie poopsies.
Or what happens if somebody who makes microchips in a different country can't get them in country A, can't get them to country B to say, make a car?
Correct.
The number of cars that didn't get made during the pandemic because they couldn't get enough microchips was pretty intense. I mean, there's a cascade failure along the way that comes with just-in-time supply. Just-in-time supply in a perfectly working world is a very efficient thing. But I think what this, and a lot of companies continue to shift more and more to that. Even disaster recovery groups. There was some big hurricane happened a couple years ago, and it turned out that the game plan of either the local state or the FEMA branch there had been, we'll swing by Costco and buy a whole bunch of water bottles to go take over. They'd stopped stockpiling them because they were like, we can just go pick them up.
Right. Yeah.
It's that was a bad decision.
Right. And I think it's really important to note that because fewer and fewer products in a globalized economy are made in the country where they are predominantly sold. And in fact, many of those products are not made from scratch in one place, right? That supply chain impact might not be something that you directly see, right? But if it's microchips, if it's lithium for batteries, if it's
Right. Like if your supply of lithium runs out,
Opposed.
there might be hundreds of thousands of products impacted because even though they're made of lots of things, they all needed a lithium battery.
Correct.
And they would then to either need to source a different thing or like there was a whole bunch of other stuff around that. But again, we're not going to get into all of this, but there are legitimate supply chain issues. We did a video. Will, timestamp up here.
Yeah.
Talking about basically the pandemic or how the pandemic affected the board game industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was supply chain and all of the different things. Like our buddy Eddie wrote it. And it's a great episode that kind of walks you through what happened to the board game industry when hiccup after hiccup after hiccup happened and how that raised basically, in some cases, doubled or more their production cost without them giving really the ability to ask the consumers for more because they'd already sold their product.
Yes.
Like that Kickstarter thing we mentioned, great for pre-selling and demand planning, but what if along the way your production cost doubles?
Yeah.
And you've basically already sold your game.
Yep.
Like that's an issue.
Absolutely. 100%. So these are sort of like the three, I think, biggest, right? The biggest ways that you get unexpected sort of shortfalls. I have a visitor. My turn to have a visitor.
Oh, you got a cat circling you?
Yeah, I do indeed. I did not notice him come in until I saw him upon the green screen, and now he's going to go off into a corner and scream at me for something. It'll be great, chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so this is not the first time we've had these sort of confluences, right? Mm. These have happened in many other examples. Mm. One of the easiest ones I think to see of all of them is graphics cards.
Because that was like all of that.
Right.
Rolled into one.
Right. And so when we say that there is a shortage, when there's scarcity, it doesn't necessarily also mean that you cannot get it. It means that you cannot get it at its intended price.
Intended quantity.
Or intended quantity, right?
Actually, quick side note on that, because have you ever been to somewhere and they're like, you can buy 2 copies of this, or you can buy like 1 case of water. Or during the pandemic, it's like you can buy a bundle of toilet paper, but no more. Like, that is another type where they're like, to keep enough for everybody, we are limiting how much you can buy at a time.
Target's been doing that with many card game products. Target did that for a really long time to combat scalping in Pokemon.
Okay.
And they are also now doing it with Lorcana. You're only
good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it prevents the Tickle Me Elmo scenario. Tickle Me Elmo was arguable. We're not going to determine whether Tickle Me Elmo was planned or unplanned scarcity. That's like a very deep, weird topic that delves back into the 90s. But
surprisingly deep. Like, anyway, carry on.
I started to go down the rabbit hole. I didn't want to go any further. I backed out of that.
Out of the hole.
Yeah, it's not good. But people got into physical altercations in stores before Christmas over who was going to purchase a Tickle Me Elmo. Like, they got in fights over something they hadn't purchased yet. In aisles, it made like news. I was like 7 or 8 at the time. It was wild. So lots of retail stores do this. You can only buy X number to prevent someone from trying to grab as many Tickle Me Elmos as they can hold and then reselling them.
Thanksgiving. Like Thanksgiving Day sales where people get hurt in stampedes. Mm-hmm. And the stores are like, okay, let's, we'll try and allay some of this by, one of these giant TVs per customer to try and, keep people from rushing through the store and hurting each other on their way to get a thing.
Absolutely. So in order to fight that, plenty of stores have instituted purchasing limits of one kind or another. Mostly it's X number of copies of thing per person who stands in line. So often you'll get like a group of people together who all purchase something, but that involves having friends, and I don't know anything about that. So, self-deprecating humor. So that leads to scarcity because while it exists, in the case of graphics cards, Lorcana, Pokemon, whatever, while it may exist, the average consumer cannot get it at its intended purchase price. The secondary market has gotten its hands on it, right? Ticket resellers, same thing, right?
Oh.
The Eras Tour has been going on for a while now. I don't know. It's been so long, I can't imagine a world where the Eras Tour wasn't blowing on my social media feed. So people have been reselling those tickets, right?
You know how long it's been going?
An era? Okay, thanks. Good. Great.
And when it stops, it will be the end of an era.
Okay. All right. So that is also a kind of scarcity, right? Where a thing exists, there is enough of that thing to fill the demand that initially existed for a product, but not at the new resale price, right? People are trying to turn a profit based on the unexpected scarcity of a thing, right? Now, tour tickets aren't exactly unexpected, right? You can do the math on how many seats are available and whatever. But in other things like Lorcana cards, PlayStations, Tickle Me Elmo, Wii's, whatever.
Oh man, Wii's.
Right? The problem is the difference between what people expect to pay and what people are asking them to pay. And that is also a kind of unplanned scarcity because the secondary market makes a thing more scarce at a reasonable price. Anyone could buy a graphics card if you had double MSRP for a while. It was between double and triple. I got
for a while. Yeah, actually, you're right. But yeah, because of resellers, basically, market speculators, people would come in and say, I think the price will continue to go up. I'm going to buy as many as I can.
Absolutely. In fact, this stream has been brought to you by 4 different sets of graphics cards, only one of which I purchased directly. So I've had in the time I've been doing streams, I've had two 1070s, a 1080 Ti, a 2080 Ti, and a 3080. And of those, only the 2080 Ti was something that I bought. Everything else I got is hand-me-downs from people who are upgrading their rigs because the price of graphics cards, even for someone who relies on one professionally to do their job, has been so absurd, right, that getting one reliably has been extremely difficult, right?
And then you take that one, for example. Graphics cards started having a run pre-pandemic because of crypto mining.
Yep.
That they were a good graphics card basically could make you more money on crypto. And it could scale. Kind of like how free-to-play games, can basically figure out their cost of acquisition, and if they can acquire a user for $3 on average and the average user pays $5 or even $3 and a penny, if you keep pouring money on that, you will keep making money. Crypto scaled the same way for people who know how to do it if they could get enough computers and graphics cards, which led to, I believe it was the entire amount of energy we've saved from installing solar in the US to being consumed by crypto.
Yes.
Or something like that.
It was in that. It was a note. I think it was 1% of all energy globally, I believe, at one point in time was being consumed by crypto.
I thought it was even more. But
I remember the 1% pretty firmly, and I have not looked it up recently.
Sure,
but
anyway.
yeah, it's at least that
a surprising amount. Like when you consider that, that includes, the cost of like every single person traveling around the world, in vehicles and airplanes and cars and heating houses and power plants and anyway.
Yeah.
But hey, they wanted graphics cards. Well, so did gamers. So did people buying other new computers. And then the pandemic hit. And there were new waves of people getting computers and upgrading things at their house. And then the supply chain issues hit of parts that they needed from different places in the world to make these were no longer able to supply them in the quantities they had before.
Correct.
Which meant that more people were getting them for crypto, people were getting them for gaming, people were getting them from work. And there was suddenly a lower supply available. And from the unexpected rush, and then from the supply chain. So it hit all 3 of those.
Yeah.
And that confluence of all 3 of them took the price and went and just kept going up.
And I think that's a really good point, is that we've sort of addressed all of these different factors in supply and demand sort of clinically. They almost never exist in a vacuum. There's generally a reason that someone under forecasts, right? People have been market forecasting for hundreds,
A long time.
plural hundreds of years, right? For what the demand is for a product, right? Whether it's on the local level or on a global level, right? People are good at that. That's like a whole
Or
job.
even as far back as like prehistoric, like how much food do we need for our village is demand planning. You know, how much do we need to grow?
Right. And so it's generally a combination of something. And the pandemic's sort of the ideal example for this discussion because it covered so many things, right? It caused supply chain disruptions because people needed to stay home and isolate. It caused unexpected demand, and all of that completely borked the initial forecasting for those items.
Yeah.
Right?
PlayStation 5 is another great example where, you know, from when it came out, kind of for the pandemic, and a whole bunch of people suddenly couldn't go out anymore and were staying at home, you know, and playing games. And Sony's inability, because of the supply chain, the breakdown. So it was like, Sony usually sandbags a little bit. They usually go a little under so they can be like, hey, we sold out quickly. Oh, don't worry, the next run's coming in a couple of weeks,
Right.
you know, kind of thing. So they were going off as a guess. This is speculation, but they've done it in the past, that kind of general strategy. And then, hey, it was a great machine. Lots of people bought it. So probably even more people than normal. And then pandemic and supply chain. And like, there was a whole bunch of factors in there. I think it took me a year and a half to get a PlayStation 5. And I wasn't trying that hard, but it wasn't like I could wander by a store where normally I would have been able to get one 3 months after release and just scoop one up and keep going.
It became noteworthy to acquire a thing, right? My roommate walked into a GameStop and sarcastically asked if they had PlayStation 5s. And the guy was like, yeah, we got one in the back. Do you want it? Like, it became a thing where you could no longer expect to get what should be a long-term run staple product of our hobbies and industry, right? And that's weird, right?
When you can't walk into a GameStop, like maybe a Target or a Walmart, but when you can't walk into a GameStop and buy a console or a Costco and buy a console, I mean, these are things that just in the past, there have been heaps of them.
Right. I don't think so. My first recollection of this was definitely with the Wii. My dad, so my little brother and I have birthdays that are very close together. But my little brother was the one who really wanted a Wii. So I helped my dad scout which places were going to do pre-orders for the Wii when. And he got up at like 3 in the morning on a Saturday to stand in line to make sure that we had a Wii for my brother's birthday, right? Like, that's weird. That's weird, right? Even for something that's like a luxury good, like a console, right? Consoles are luxury goods. No one needs a console.
It's weird, but it's not as like, I've been in midnight lines for game releases before.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, like the Wii was so more Nintendo, because they'd switched from the GameCube to the Wii and people were nervous about would motion control actually sell.
Yeah.
Because at the time that was a huge leap. Like, there were a lot of people in the industry. There were a lot of people who were like, that's a gimmick. That will never work.
Well, to those people, I say, I just watched the Nintendo Direct this morning, where one of the flagship titles that was announced was the new WarioWare game, which has a brand new series of more ridiculous than ever motion controls to do micro games with. So.
Yeah. But at the time, new things can be scary.
Yeah.
And a lot of people also, Nintendo did not do a great job of selling to a lot of the game dev community why you would want motion control in an era where people were like looking at the other things coming out, which was the PlayStation 360 and the PS3. Like,
you mean the Xbox 360?
Sorry, Xbox 360 and the PS3. Like, those were things that people were looking at. They're like, I know what that is. I want that. And then Nintendo was like, hey, here's a thing that's half the CPU of that, and you're going to be waving stuff around instead. And a lot of developers were like, what?
Yeah. And then everyone got their hands on Wii Sports.
Yep. And then Wii Sports came, and people were like, oh, I get it.
I now understand. Whoops. Right?
Yeah.
But I think it's really easy to see, though, that all of these factors tie up together into a very complicated thing, because I think it's worth noting. Companies want to provide you with more ways for you to give them your money. That's kind of the purpose of a company that makes a good or service, is they want to provide you. So,
if I make a PlayStation, I want to be selling you the PlayStation.
Correct.
And I want to be selling as many as I can, because that is how my company makes money.
Right.
So it's weird.
Right. And there is this thing where they don't want there to be too many. And I think in gaming especially, people are a little hesitant because of ET. Yeah. I still think that the entire industry bears to some extent this legend, right? This horrific legend of and then the game's told so poorly that they're still digging up copies of it in the desert. And you're like, I don't want that to be my game. I better not order that many. Right? And that's a thing.
That combined with, there have been other devs who have put out games that they thought sold decently well. And they're like, hey, cool. That's a good mid-selling game. We did okay. But then realized that the group who'd done the demand planning, had ordered twice as many. And suddenly the game that the dev team thought was a good, base hit, a good solid game, not amazing, but good solid, was a huge loss because too many had been printed. Something entirely out of their control.
Yep.
And suddenly the game was a failure and they went out of business. You hear the ET story, but you don't hear a lot of the stories of some guy at the company or publisher ordered too many copies and the group went out of business because on something that should have been, with one other, with the decision being made slightly differently, perfectly fine.
Yep. I've definitely seen cases even where manual data entry in stock levels where somebody accidentally hits a key one too many times.
Oh no.
Or hits a 0 instead of a period on their number key. Those are fun. But the system is oddly fragile, right? This whole system of supply and demand and getting consumers the stuff that they want and the time frame that they want it in is surprisingly multifaceted and fragile. So I thought, Geoff, we could sort of bring this all back to where it began.
Oh, yeah.
And
Lorcana.
Right. We kind of spitball what I think. So this is my amateur-ish, and I've done a couple of days of reading on this. This is what I think happened. Okay.
Well, let's hold up the pack again so people see what we're talking about.
Okay. So these are Lorcana cards. They're this is Mickey Mouse. Yeah. It's great, right?
Or actually, really quick, Will, what's Lorcana?
Lorcana is a new trading card game published by Ravensburger that is the officially licensed Disney trading card game. So it features all of the cast of characters from many Disney movies, some of which have never had this kind of treatment before. And it's got all kinds of stuff, and there's already future expansions planned, and it plays a little bit like something like a cross between Magic and Hearthstone, sort of. It solves a lot of the design.
So it's a modern CCG. With a Disney property.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the fact that it plays a little bit like Magic crossed with Hearthstone will come up in a second. So, couple of things. One, I think Magic has had a lot of churn recently. Churn is a natural process where people stop engaging with a thing and new people start engaging with it. That's sort of a natural process that happens with every kind of entertainment product. Marvel experiences churn, Magic experiences churn, D&D experiences churn, we experience churn. Every kind of entertainment does it. It's not a bad thing. But the rate at which, people churn through is hard to predict. It feels like in my circles, Magic post-pandemic is having a little more churn than normal because of the rate at which their sets are coming out. They have literally started moving from this set has released into the preview for the next set a week later. So there were cases where in recent history there was a Commander set called Commander Masters. They released that and then immediately went into the previews for the next set, which was Wilds of Eldraine. And immediately before Commander Masters, I believe, was the Lord of the Rings set. And so we've had so many releases back to back to back that the churn has increased. So I don't think, on the forecasting side, I don't think Ravensburger forecasted accurately how much demand there was for this product.
For a non-magic, a modern non-magic game with the beloved properties.
Correct. I also think they underforecasted for the Disney population, which doesn't seem possible, and yet,
could happen.
Right. I think that there's a huge number of people who are collecting them just because they're cool, shiny Disney-related merchandise. Right? People buy the ears and the shirts and the mugs and the Epcot stuff and the everything. Right? Disney is very much about acquisition of side effect merch. So
I wonder if they forecast thinking Magic where they should have been thinking Pokemon.
I think that that's probably accurate. Pokemon is
just like
a
for kind
dominant
of mindset.
force, right? Pokemon is a dominant force, and I think I don't even have a firm grasp on how dominant Pokemon is in the TCG world. As I was doing research for this, I found a lot of people who were saying that Pokemon is the most popular TCG. And I would not have laid money on that. I would have
I
said...
wonder what they mean by most popular. I wonder, is that like most sold, most played, most players? Like, most popular could mean a variety of different... But anyway, sorry, just
I think
interesting
it's
side thought.
I think it's a good question. Let me give you an example. Mm-hmm. I have a Target near me that I go to for various and sundry supplies. That Target, in the section near the registers, has a trading card game display. That trading card game display is not really aimed at hardcore gamers. It's aimed at people making impulse purchases as they purchase their clothing.
That whole section is always impulse purchase. It's candy bars and soft drinks and
exactly.
Now CCG cards.
And now CCG cards.
I love this world.
So there are lots and lots of Pokemon cards and a section for sold out Lorcana and a very small selection of Yu-Gi-Oh! And a section on Magic that's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and is often sold out and not restocked. So I don't know what to make of that, but I do know that for the general public, right? Again, you're watching a video about game design on a channel about game design or in a chat about game design, you are probably not the average consumer, statistically speaking. Right? I think I do agree that I think they were thinking Magic when they should have been thinking Pokemon. And then there's sort of this other factor, which is led into this, which is lots of people are holding this for resale or holding it as a collector's item because it's Disney merchandise. The collecting aspect, even though Ravensburger have worked hard against it, is still very present. People want to collect all of them rather than play the game. This is not a game that's aimed at collectors. They're not doing a first edition. The reprint that's coming...
Good for them.
Yeah, right. The reprint that's coming will be identical to the first printing, despite many people on social media asking for them to make them distinct so that people can value the first edition higher. Ravensburger's paraphrased, very consistent response is, no, kick rocks. Which
they want this to be a game that people buy and play as opposed to buy and hoard.
Correct. And I think that the impulse for people to buy and hoard it is a big part of it. So I think...
But we've been Pavlovian trained with a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yep. And I think the last one, and I think that this is kind of important, is I feel like the distribution feels lumpy to me. And I don't know who's responsible for that. But scarcity doesn't have to be global. It doesn't have to mean that there's none.
Very true, yeah.
That there's none anywhere. It just has to mean that you, individual consumer, can't get the thing, right? And so it feels like there are definitely places that have more or less Lorcana available, but that it's hurting some places more. For instance, we've heard from members of our community that they went to physical pre-releases for Lorcana, where there was enough Lorcana product to sell and seat large pools of people to play at a pre-release. I don't know of any place near me that could accomplish that with the amount of product that they've been shipped. They've asked for as much as possible, but there's some issue in the supply chain about how it's being distributed.
Actually, part of what it might be is quantity of game stores, and that they might, for example, have said, we will ship each game store out X amount of product. And so an area that had 20 game stores in it would be getting a lot more sent into that area than an area that only had 4 or 5 game stores in it.
Correct.
Because there are sometimes caps on a per store basis, again, to prevent kind of the hoarding and other.
And different stores have different relationships with different distributors. And
True.
Because all of those different things shake out in this store has 20 copies of each starter deck, and this store has 3 copies of each starter deck, because of all of the variants and all of the things all the way up the supply chain, it can read like scarcity in individual places, right? Because people are saying in chat that there are stores near them that have plenty. And as I've not yet seen a single copy stay on the shelf in my area at any store at any price. And so it's this big confluence of factors that boils down to we can't get what we want because because people forecasted things incorrectly based on the wrong model. Supply chain is lumpy and doesn't always distribute things evenly to all of the places where it might be consumed. And sometimes I don't know about the production. I do know that their reprint is not slated to be delivered until the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024, according to their most recent press release on it. So they have a pretty decent lead time. I imagine they would love to be printing more right now.
Oh, every group, and this goes back to when I was saying, you go order board games or discs or whatever, and you put in your amount because there's a slot of people who will go print, there are only a certain number of companies that specialize in making that. And the lead time it takes to get it in, have them make it, and ship it over to your distribution centers who then distribute it out to everybody who's going to sell it is it's not like, what's the group that made the game? Sorry.
Ravensburger.
Yeah, it's not like they have a printing press.
I have in my hands a Magic card and a Lorcana card, and it's very similar card stock. It's very similar card quality. I will say Lorcana's foils are better, if you're wondering about that kind of thing. So they're likely competing with other trading card games for a production slot, right?
Or not even just that. I doubt that there's a group that specializes in all they do is trading card games.
Sure.
I mean, they're probably
Baseball.
and book covers and, cardboard backing that goes behind action figures. I mean, these machines that can do it can probably do thousands of different things. It's the card stock they put in and how it's cut.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I imagine that they're very happy, right? This is a sign of great success for Ravensburger. The problem is that they're going to have to hope that the community stays engaged while they wait for the reprint. So,
I'll be curious to see what they do to their second order or their first expansion. The next, I wonder if they, basically were kicking over to the people who are already in the process of making it. You're like, hey, remember when we asked you for X amount? Can we get 2X? And then again, that comes back to a forecasting thing. Will it still be as popular then?
Absolutely.
I guarantee they're upping their order, but they're also wondering how much should they up their order. And they're also talking to the company who's doing the order. That company might not be able to do anymore. They might have already have the next 5 projects or 50 projects that they're making after that print run already queued up.
Yep.
Again, these are interesting things that you don't have to worry about with a fully digital product that are absolutely part of the physical product manufacturing and experience.
Yep, 100%. Well, I think on that note, in the comments below, did we miss a thing? Did we miss some element of supply?
I'm sure we missed a thing. Tell us what we missed.
Yeah, tell us what we missed. Tell us what product you remember having a really hard time getting. What did you pay money for and then feel like it was an achievement that you were given the privilege to pay money for that thing? Was it a Steam Deck, a VR headset, a PlayStation 5? Yeah, right. What was it? Tell us more about that in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining us for our discussion, and we hope to see you all next time. Say bye to the people, Geoff.
Bye to the people, Geoff. See y'all.
Bye, everybody.
you.